A lot of the books I've been reading lately have been compilations of short horror stories, which is kind of hard to make a review on unless there is some connecting theme with at least some of them, like I talked about with The King in Yellow. But I've done some reading of another kind with William James's The Varieties of Religious Experience, which is a collection of lectures by the philosopher on religion and different religious experiences people have. Now, William James has a reputation of writing philosophical treatises as though they were novels. Boy, howdy, is that true. The man is very wordy and likes to put in a lot of lots of quotes, very long and detailed footnotes, and anecdote after anecdote after anecdote, which I absolutely loved, as all this extra explanation helped me to digest the dense lectures. Now, obviously, given that this compilation of lectures was first published in 1902, it's not really a complete variety of religious experience, but rather a variety of Christian experience, with a few references to other Abrahamic religions and Asian religions here and there. But that's just as well, since a book on the complete variety of religious experience, even in 1902, would take up several very, very thick books. So the book is broken down into lectures, which themselves are grouped by topic. James starts off with talking about the origins of different religious experiences and how that impacts their validity. Even today, it is a common talking point that religious visions, hearing God talk to you, etc., all have a biological and/or psychological origin, and so cannot really be from God. James proposes that God communicates using these pathways, and those with psychological maladies, such as epilepsy or those prone to hallucinations, are more susceptible to God's influence. Another point that we again hear today quite often is that Christianity cannot be true because the Bible is fallible. However, James again comes in to say that while the Bible is chock full of inaccuracies, historical, scientific, and so on, that this does not disprove God nor taint the value of Christianity, as religions and religious beliefs should be based on their fruit and not their origin. For example, if someone is inspired by the Gospels to go out and do charity work and treat everyone with kindness, does it really matter if Jesus never actually rose from the dead? Or if the Torah inspires feelings of devotion to God and a wish to serve Him, does it really matter if the Jews never actually were in Egypt, nor wandering around for 40 years? I'm unsure if I find these arguments really convincing, as I already believed in some sort of divinity out there. But if anyone in the audience is agnostic and/or atheist, let me know your opinion. The next set of lectures talked about what James called the mind cure movement. For hundreds of years, up until the mid to late 1800s, Christianity was mainly fire and brimstone, using fear to control people. Fear of hell, fear of the wrath of God, fear of Satan and his demons, etc. But as we progressed through the Victorian era, this teaching started to lose favor, especially among the youths. Also at this time, mysticism was gaining popularity as people across nations started trying their hand at communicating with the dead. By the turn of the century, people largely got bored with this, but still did not return to the fire and brimstone teachings of old Christianity. Instead, a new form of Christianity was gaining popularity, that being the belief that God can and should be seen as a source of profound love and security. The extreme version of this idea is James's mind cure, the belief that everything is as it should be in our world, and it is good to delight in everything and to ignore that which bothers, worries, or otherwise upsets you. You're going to die one day, so why bother brooding over it? And should something bad happen that you can't ignore, you should rejoice in it too, as is the will of God, be that as a corrective device or to serve to your benefit later as a blessing in disguise. Of course, the criticisms of this line of thinking is that it is shallow and akin to sticking your head in the sand. He also talks about the opposite of this, those with extremely pessimistic views. A lot of the examples he gives are simply people suffering from depression or other related mental issues. He also talks about different aspects typical of this worldview, such as dreading one's inevitable demise, and the belief that the world may have small joys, but is still mostly a bad place, and that while some people are generally good people, people as a whole are evil, selfish, and greedy. Some people of this persuasion find themselves fearing God and his judgment so much that they wish they did not have souls so that they would not have one to lose or be damned forever, so on and so forth. These people he deems the sick-souled, and of course criticisms of this view are mainly the opposite of the former, that the person puts too much emphasis on life's struggles and does not allow themselves to enjoy life's goods. James also proposes that there are two types of people, read Christians, the once born, those who are either born into Christianity and never questioned their faith, or those who converted from a different faith, and the twice born, those who are once Christian, had a crisis of faith, and ultimately came back to God via some sort of religious event. Those in the mind cure camp are the first, while those who were temporarily in the sick-souled camp are the latter. To put it short, those who never questioned Christianity are once born, and those who have, but came back are twice born. He talks a lot about conversion, and by conversion he means an internal religious event that brings someone to God, back to God, or closer to God, be that gradual or sudden. He goes on to talk about how these religious events are ultimately psychological in nature, with people of certain dispositions being more likely to experience such events, but reminds us of his first lecture that the origin does not matter, it is the result of the event that does. Whether you believe the conversion event to be a divine origin or not, this event is very real to the person experiencing it. He also talks about how the once born and the twice born do not seem to be any different when it comes to faithfulness, dedication, piety, charity, or in any other perceivable way. One is not better than the other, even though the twice born have, quote, borne their cross and so been touched by God. When it comes to what religion in particular these conversion events occur in, unsurprisingly, no one religion is singled out. He talks about many different events, leading those who experience them to different sects of Christianity. As mentioned, this book focuses on Christianity, which is no surprise as James himself was born a Protestant. In fact, a few he talks about are not centered around the Abrahamic God at all. The experience here simply stating that they felt washed with heavenly love, grace, and awe, themes present in all of the anecdotes he provides. So if these conversion events are in fact divinely inspired, you can rest assured that whatever God, God's spirits, or what have you is out there do not particularly care which religion you choose or lack thereof. James even states in his lectures that the benefits of religion and characteristics of saintliness or near saintliness are not exclusive to the religious, let alone Christians. After talking about conversions, he then goes on to talk about saintliness, often the result of these conversion events. Whether or not this feeling persists or is of a temporary nature, it is common, says James, for people to develop a saintly nature. James defines a saintly nature by a composite of certain beliefs and characteristics, that an ideal power exists beyond this world, a sense of friendly continuity with this power and a willingness to surrender to its control, an immense elation, a feeling of freedom, and a shifting of emotional center towards loving and harmonious affections. These in turn result in a desire for self-surrender, strength of the soul, letting loose of inhibitions and developing of patience and fortitude, purity, abstaining from vices, and charity, treating all things with empathy and kindness, including your enemies. James goes on to describe examples of extremes of the above mentioned beliefs and the results, particularly when it comes to self-surrender and purity. James then takes an interesting turn of subject as to bring to question the values of saintliness themselves. James argues that the worth of saintliness, much like the worth of any one religion, is connected to its fruits. He says that we cannot be sure which, if any, religion is correct, or even if there has to be one true religion. As times and general attitudes change, so do religions, and gods with those that offer the least or demand the most being replaced with religions and gods that are more agreeable with people. Additionally, because each person is different and has different wants and needs, each person will be served best by a different religious experience or lack thereof. So those who reach the loftiness of saintlyhood, or who follow the previous mentioned beliefs of saintliness, are not necessarily closer to God, but at the same time, they aren't exactly wrong for living the way they do. In essence, these people follow the ways of life that they do because it serves them best, as they really and truly believe that they are following the demands of their god or gods. James turns away from the subject of Satanists back towards the subject of religion itself, and if there be any good arguments for its validity outside of science. He first turns to the mystic, that being someone who has had a personal experience with the divine that cannot be characterized as something externally sensed like a vision or hearing the voice of God, rather something sensed internally, a sudden feeling of the divine or enlightenment of some sort. This experience is, by its nature, impossible to fully understand or convey in words alone. One must personally experience it. Much like how a blind person can know all the science that goes into vision and understand all that which is told them about seeing, the person will never fully know what it's like to see unless they see themselves. However, much like with the saintly people, we run into an issue. These mystical experiences are so varied that does not point to the general direction of any particular religion, with some mystics joining completely different religions, and the very nature of each individual mystical experience sometimes being directly contradictory to someone else's. For example, in the several anecdotes sourced by James, one tells of a person whose mystical experience led him to the notion that everything was God and God was love, while another's experience led them to believe that God worked through suffering, and to serve God was to suffer. And other than suffering, God had no use nor concern for us, simply using us as a means to get what he wanted, no matter how much suffering that caused. Being unsatisfied, James turns to philosophy. The arguments in favor of the spiritual, read the Christian God, that we see today are the same as they were in 1902, at least mostly. You have the ontological argument, the complexity argument, the godly gaps, so on and so forth. These arguments have been happening for so long that even James, over 120 years ago, thought that they were well drawn out and boring. He comes to the conclusion that if these arguments were actually convincing, and not merely affirming to those who already believed, we wouldn't still be having these arguments, which I have to agree with. He does bring up an interesting point about the use of the idealized Christian God, though. If God is all perfect, all knowing, all powerful, all happy, all everything, then humans can be of no real use to him, nor could he be of any real use to us. He is perfect, so it would be hopeless for even the best human to possibly compare or affect him in any way. He is all knowing, so there is nothing that humans could create nor discover that could benefit him. He is all good, so again, even the best human could not possibly compare. And because he is all perfect, all knowing, all powerful, he can't be any happier than he is right now, otherwise he wouldn't be all one of those things at least. And if God then is all happy, there is nothing humans could possibly do to increase said happiness. In essence, there is nothing even the best human could possibly say, think, or do that would be anything but a disappointment in comparison. Additionally, if God is all loving, then he loves everyone equally, and wishes to help everyone equally, which is all well and fine until you realize that he wants to help you just as much as he wants to help your enemy. God permits a world with evil and helps those deserving and undeserving alike, regardless of devotion and belief. Because of all this, there is no real reason to worship such a being, as the effect on our everyday lives is the same regardless, so why put in the effort? Quote, I think that, even were we forced by a coercive logic to believe in God's attributes, we still should have to confess them to be destitute of all intelligible significance. Candidly speaking, how do such qualities as these make any definite connection with our life? And if they severely call for no distinctive adaptations of our conduct, what vital difference can it possibly make to a man's religion, whether they be true or not? I cannot conceive of its being of the smallest consequence to us religiously, that any one of them should be true. Pray, what specific acts can I perform in order to adapt myself better to God's simplicity? Or how does it assist me to plan my behavior to know that his happiness is anyhow absolutely complete? James concludes his book with any conclusions we can make on the religion as a whole. And here is where I think James makes a mistake. When he approaches the idea that there is nothing outside the concrete world of science in which we live in, James does not even consider it as a possibility. His words are literally bosh, but he does not give a reason why, aside from he just feels that way. And while I do agree that it certainly feels like there is something unknowable yet profound out there that you can call God, I am a theist after all, I have to disagree with James that the idea that this is simply a trick of the mind arising from an evolutionary survival tactic is bosh. I do believe it is a very real possibility. I'm just not personally convinced that the supernatural does not exist. I suppose that makes me an agnostic theist. James also provides a frankly unsatisfactory rebuttal to the survival theory of religion, the theory that states that religion rose out of a survival benefit that it provided to groups that had religion over groups that did not. This benefit could have taken various forms, such as community cohesion or a way to build up an army that doesn't fear death. James argues against this theory by saying that the natural world and the field of science that goes with it is only part of the whole truth, that believing that religion only came out of a survival need and living one's life only in a natural world deprives one of a full life. However, I have met plenty of atheists that consider lives just as fulfilling, if not more so, than when they were religious. If religious truth should be based on religious fruits, then surely this would apply for a lack of religion. For those who lack religion yet still consider their lives fulfilling, then we would have to accept that their lives lack nothing, even without religion, or at least nothing that means anything to them. Additionally, James argues that if survival theory were true, then religion would not have anything that is counter-survival or harmful toward its members, such as not exploiting a certain food source or needlessly cutting off body parts. However, survival theory only attempts to answer the question of why religion arose in the first place, not its evolution. James brings up one more argument in favor of the existence of God, and that being that God exists beyond our natural world and thus cannot be proven by using science. Science only concerns itself with the natural world, and God's supernatural nature cannot be proven nor disproven using such a method. Whether or not you find this personally convincing, I will leave to you. With all that being said, James turns away from the question of if the supernatural exists to what can we conclude about the supernatural given what we know about religion. Is there anything that every religion can agree on? James, given the culture he grew up in and lived in, is not so much concerned with religions outside of the Abrahamic faiths. He does mention Hinduism, Buddhism, and vaguely waves his hand at the idea of other polytheistic religions, but even he mentions that he knows little of these, particularly about Buddhism. Also during this time, understanding and practice of non-theistic religion was virtually unheard of in the West. However, he does theorize 3 points that all religious persons should agree with, given the context. That the visible world is only part of a more spiritual universe from which it draws its chief significance. Union or harmony with the higher universe is our true end. Prayer or intercommunication with the spirit thereof, be that God, the law, multiple gods, etc., is a process where work is done and spiritual energy flows in and produces effects, psychological or material, within the natural world. These points are intentionally left vague so that anyone of any religion could theoretically fill in the gaps to suit their beliefs. For example, if you hold a non-theistic religion, you could call this nebulous spirit the subconscious, or if you are a polytheist, you can interpret it as multiple deities. James wraps up his book stating that his own beliefs beyond these 3 points, or his overbeliefs, as he terms them. While James grew up in a Protestant Christian family, he did not consider himself Christian. He considered himself a sort of moderator between religious faith and scientific agnosticism. In reflection of this, James's overbeliefs are humble but practical and carefully thought out. They are that the further limits of our being plunge into the supernatural world from which our ideal impulses originate. This unseen region produces real effects in the natural world. Communicating with this unseen force changes our finite being. In essence, communicating with it changes us. Humans and this thing influence each other, and opening ourselves to this thing is our deepest destiny. And finally, the universe, at least so much as it concerns us, is changed for the better or worse in accordance with our carrying out or avoiding this being's demands. James's The Variety of Religious Experience is nearly 600 pages of very dense reading. I'm sure I missed something in my review, but I feel like I got his main points. That the study of religion should be based on religious experience rather than religious institutions, as religious institutions are byproducts of the experiences of many different people. That religion, being highly individualized experience, should be judged based on its fruits, since religion ultimately concerns itself with the supernatural, that which exists beyond the natural world. Its truth can only be verified by its usefulness, and so there is no one and ultimate truth since people are so diverse and have such different needs and wants. At least there is no ultimate truth that humans can be sure of. The field of psychology should study extreme examples of religion, particularly the kind that can be considered pathological, as they offer the closest thing as a microscope into the mind. That religious experience can be subdivided into those which are potentially divinely inspired, and those that are pathological and ultimately harmful. But those who do have mental health issues can and do have valid religious experiences, the difference being in the fruits of the experience. And that religion ultimately serves a purpose in helping people better their lives. And that religion ultimately serves a purpose in helping people live better, fuller lives. Whether or not a person's beliefs in question are true outside of themselves is irrelevant, so long as their beliefs serve a purpose for their benefit. While I do disagree with James on a few points, I found the rest of his ideas to be well thought out and found in rational thought. While this book did make me reflect on a few things, I don't think my overall ideas on religion or existence of anything that can be called God have changed, as they already were fairly in line with James's writings. The main difference in opinion being from experience. While William James was far more educated in the field of philosophy than I happen to know more about non-Abrahamic religions than he did, and so my views on what religion can be are more loose, even given James's already liberal definition of religion. For example, James directly ties the supernatural with religion, even if you interpret it as the subconscious. However, I don't believe that the belief in or interaction with anything that can be considered supernatural as integral to religion. There are religions out there that are based on community and shared values rather than any higher force. If the divine does exist, science won't be able to prove nor disprove it due to its supernatural nature. Whatever it is that does exist out there, if it does at all, humans were not meant to understand it, otherwise we would be born with such knowledge, or at least the ability to easily obtain it. If this thing did care that humans did know and understand it and how we lived our lives in relation to it, we wouldn't even be here discussing it today. That knowledge would just be instinct, and we would still have the free will to act on it or not. If the divine does exist, it does not much care how humans interpret it, nor what we do with our lives concerning it, but is willing to interact with us in whichever way we are most willing to accept it, if at all, should such an interaction serve a net good. At least that's my overarching belief concerning the supernatural. As long as you are not harming anything sapient, with self-preservation as an exception, feel free to live your life however you see fit, whether or not that includes religious ideas.